Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. At AM 630. WMAL.
37:37 on WMAL. Brian Wilson. We're joined today by Rob Carson in for Brian Neiman, who will return later this week. Still on paternity leave and taking care of little Charlie Neiman.
I like that name. I'm glad he didn't go with something goofy like he was considering.
Well, we were suggesting Barack, and he said, no, that wasn't going to happen. Then I told him, I said, you know, what you really need to do is you need to correct the error that your parents made many, many years ago. You need to call your young son Brian, but you need to spell it with an I,
yes,
which is the correct spelling of the name.
Yes.
And I said, you know, so you can right this wrong that was done many years ago, but he decided he wasn't going to listen to that either. Mm-hmm. So he went with Charlie, Charlie Gray Neiman.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, enough of that. We got people on the line who want to be on the air and want to talk, including Richard Miniter, columnist for Forbes.com and author of a new book called Leading from Behind. Richard, how are you?
Hey, great, Brian. How do you spell the
name? So, Leading from Behind, what's the book about and what's the premise?
Well, Leading from Behind is a look at the 6 big decisions of the Obama years. It sort of asks the question, what kind of a leader is Barack Obama? I mean, it's sort of an interesting question, right? I mean, here's a guy who comes into the presidency with very little sort of executive experience. His entire life has been either at the committee table or at the law professor's lectern. He's always part of the group. He's never having to lead from the front of the room and make decisions and take sole responsibility the way a governor or a CEO or heck, even a basketball coach would. So I was sort of curious, like, how does a guy who has almost no executive experience take on the biggest executive job in the world? So I looked at the 6 big decisions of the Obama years: healthcare reform, budget negotiations with the Republicans, killing bin Laden, dealing with Israel and the Arab Spring and the problems of the Middle East, and also dealing with a wayward subordinate who lies to Congress, which is Attorney General Eric Holder in Fast and Furious. And taking a look at those decisions and interviewing people inside the White House, the various federal agencies and in the halls of Congress who work directly with the president to sort of get at this question of what kind of a leader he is. And a very surprising picture emerges. Someone who's much more dilatory and indecisive and moody and somewhat sensitive than you'd expect. I think the conservative critique of Obama is basically wrong. The idea that he's a stone-cold progressive, to quote one blogger, who's just out there endlessly trying to push America in one direction. When you talk to the actual progressives who work with the president, they see someone who sometimes takes months to make a decision and surprises them with a lot of the decisions that he does make.
What do you think diminishing the role of the United States in the world community plays in his foreign policy?
Well, it's playing a significant role. I mean, if you look at the reaction to the attacks on the U.S. embassies across the Arab League, right? You know, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Cairo, Yemen, and Lebanon, and so on, right? If you look at those attacks, the primary narrative to come out of the administration has been to blame an obscure filmmaker who put a trailer on YouTube, and to push that narrative, even though it's quite clear that there's very few, if anybody, in the Arab world that actually seen the video prior to the protests, and those that had seen the video had seen it thanks to the very groups that were upset about it. If you look at sort of Egypt, where a lot of this starts, Egyptians, fewer than 10% of Egyptians have internet access at home, and fewer than a third have internet access on their phones. And more importantly, they pay by the minute for access, and as is true of much of the Arab world. So they're not surfing YouTube because they would have to pay by the minute, and they're certainly not surfing YouTube in the English language section. But what happened is the radical Salafis, which make the Muslim Brotherhood look like moderates, they're the ones who did translate it into, dub it into Arabic, and distribute it throughout the Arab world. So these people are arsonists who claim that the way to put out the fire is for us to burn our own constitution and punish an obscure filmmaker in California. They, the demonstrators and the radicals, are the arsonists. When really they should be held accountable for their own actions, and the administration needs to stop blaming America first and to say, hey, This is a coordinated attack by groups that are fairly unfriendly to the United States to begin with.
Real quick, we got about a minute left here. Can you tell me what you think about the situation with our embassies? A lot of reporting has started to suggest, although it hasn't really taken hold, that we didn't have enough security in place and that perhaps we were warned in advance that things were about to happen and that those warnings sort of didn't get noticed and passed up the line like they should have been.
Well, certainly that's true in Benghazi, where the embassy had been briefly attacked a few months earlier and been under threat for some time. But the Marines were not brought in. I mean, the other question is, the firefight lasted for something on the order of 4 hours. Why was the White House unable to send in, a helicopter or other means to extract the ambassador and the two former SEALs that died alongside defending him? Why was there really no time for a rescue effort when the firefight lasted nearly 4 hours and U.S. Navy ships and naval air stations are less than an hour's flight time away? All right,
I need a quick answer. Spontaneous, as Susan Rice, the UN ambassador, has suggested, or was this a planned attack in Benghazi?
It's a series of planned attacks in Benghazi.
All right. Richard Miniter, always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us here on WMAL.
Thanks, Brian, with a Y.
No, it's Brian with an I.
Yeah.
It's an I. You got to get that right, Richard. I'm sorry. It's the proper way to
stand corrected.
It's the other guy who spells it wrong. Why? In the days leading up to September 11th, two things happened. We didn't beef up our security, and the president didn't bother to go to his daily intelligence briefing.